But our Attorney General is as clueless as she's ever been. She stands in the way of our very urgent mission, which is to dismantle left-wing terror cells, left-wing NGOs that threaten our fundamental right to freedom of speech. Pam Bondi is not that person, and that's why Trump has to cut her loose. I want to talk about this. The assassination of Charlie Kirk was one of the most direct and consequential attacks on the freedom of speech in American history. And regardless of your political beliefs, that's undeniable. For Christians and conservatives in particular, the assassination was the latest and most horrifying of many, many recent efforts to undermine our fundamental civil liberties. Christians have been arrested for praying peacefully outside of abortion clinics. They've been punished for refusing to bake cakes for gay weddings, for refusing to fund contraceptives for employees. And now, in a very public fashion, one of the most prominent Christian voices in the country was gunned down for expressing his political views and his faith. Now, in the wake of Charlie's murder, I said something that I still believe is true. I still very much believe, which is that on the right, and only on the right, now is the time for unity. And I say only on the right because that's the only place where there can be unity. There cannot be unity with the left. It is literally impossible. They want us dead. They want to kill us. And even if they didn't, we have nothing in common in terms of our values and beliefs and priorities. We have no common ground at all. None. We cannot agree on even what universe we live in. But on the right, there needs to be unity. We have to put aside any internal squabbling or vendettas that we might have on our own side, and we have to focus instead on crushing left-wing extremism, including the cult of trans ideology. We have to pursue the billionaires who fund this extremism, the NGOs that launder the billionaires' money, the doctors and hospitals that mutilate patients for ideological and financial reasons. This has to be a coordinated and focused effort. There's no room for any distraction or counter-signaling. And it's not an easy task. Our opponents are extremely well-funded, very powerful. But if we cannot accomplish this, then very soon the right to freedom of speech will become a dead letter. If it's not already, the collapse of our constitutional order will follow. And therefore, a unified right is more important than it's ever been if we're going to have any chance of victory. Now, at the same time, unity isn't possible if some conservatives, particularly conservatives in positions of power, don't grasp the fundamental goals of our movement. And that's why, although it's obviously not an ideal situation, I wish we didn't have to do this right now, we do need to talk at some length about the recent remarks of Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, particularly what she said on a podcast hosted by Katie Miller, who's the wife of top White House advisor Stephen Miller. Now, you may have seen portions of this interview online, but I'm going to play footage with some more context. Put bluntly, these remarks, along with her job performance in other areas, disqualify Pam Bondi from serving as the Attorney General of the United States. They make it very clear that she is not equipped to lead the war on left-wing domestic terrorism that must urgently be waged. And when I talked about unifying on the right, I did, as you remember, make an explicit exception for politicians and public officials. And this is why we still need to be able to criticize them when they drop the ball. And Pam Bondi is dropping the ball egregiously. So here's the footage. Watch.
These universities are complicit in allowing conservatives to be harassed on campus. And what happens when you allow a university to harass conservatives and don't expel or don't take an action is what happened last week.
It is, and you know, on a broader level, the anti-Semitism, what's been happening at college campuses around this country is disgusting, it's despicable, and we've been fighting that. We've been fighting these universities left and right, and we're not going to stop. There's free speech, and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society.
Do you see more law enforcement going after these groups who are using hate speech and putting cuffs on people so we show them that some action is better than no action?
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech, anything. And that's across the aisle. I mean, look what happened. Think about Josh Shapiro. What happened to Governor Shapiro? I talked to Josh multiple times. Democrat governor, Jewish. They firebombed his house while his wife and children were sleeping upstairs. It's a miracle. Nothing worse happened to, it's a miracle that nothing happened to Josh and he and his family are safe.
This should not need to be said, but the concept of hate speech should never be invoked by anyone, much less a conservative, and much less a conservative who's the highest law enforcement official in the United States of America. Hate speech is not a real thing. Hate speech is not a valid legal category, as Charlie Kirk himself argued. Hate speech is, if it's anything, it's protected speech, period. You can say hateful things. You have the legal right to say hateful things. You could say the most hateful, bigoted thing you want to say. And the government has no right to punish you for it. Now, there could be social consequences. There could be cultural consequences. Other people can decide that they don't want to associate with you anymore because you say horrible, vile things and revealed yourself to be a horrible, vile person. That can happen, obviously. But the government cannot punish you on the basis that what you said was hateful. You could say hateful things. You could say hateful things about me. You could say hateful things about Christians and conservatives. You can say hateful things about homosexuals. You can target anyone you want with your hateful speech. It is your constitutional right to do so. Again, there might be social consequences, but there should be no legal consequences. And the alternative, as we see in authoritarian regimes like the UK, Canada, or North Korea, is that legitimate political discourse will inevitably be labeled hate speech by the people in charge. If I recorded my podcast, this very podcast, in London, I'd be arrested by now. They're dragging comedians and single mothers to prison because they oppose transgenderism and open borders. That's what hate speech means in practice. It means suspending the freedom of expression. It means forcing people to say things that they know are false. At the White House, Stephen Miller, who has vowed to dismantle left-wing terror groups following Charlie's assassination, understands this very well. Without mentioning Pam Bondi by name, he basically put her on blast, essentially, saying, quote, "The path forward is not to mimic the ACLU of the mid-90s. It's to take all necessary and rational steps to save Western civilization." That's about as clear as it gets. Stephen Miller, who has been absolutely excellent through all of this, by the way, and through Trump's whole term, absolutely great. He understands that hate speech is a concept that was invented by the left for the purpose of silencing conservative voices. It's a concept that's emboldened extremists, including LGBT terrorists. After all, when the government says it's hateful to affirm the truth, it legitimizes some of the most deranged and psychotic members of society. None of this should require any explanation for anyone, much less the Attorney General, but here we are. Picture this. You walk over to your computer, pull up your entire browsing history, hit print, and then nail those pages to your front door for every neighbor to see. Sounds absolutely insane, right? Well, that's essentially what's happening every single day, unless you're protecting yourself with ExpressVPN. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Your internet provider can see every single website you've ever visited, even when you're browsing in incognito mode. In many countries, they're actually required to keep detailed logs of your online activity for years, just in case, the government wants to take a look. And if you're in the US, it gets even worse because internet providers can literally sell your personal browsing data to whoever they want. Now, you can't stop your internet provider from trying to collect this information, but you can make sure they never get it in the first place. That's where ExpressVPN comes in. It encrypts all of your online activity because it even reaches your internet provider, turning their logs into complete gibberish. As Daily Wire host, I travel the country for rallies and events. I'm often using hotel, airport, and public Wi-Fi. With sensitive information at stake, I never connect without ExpressVPN. It's my first and best line of defense against hackers who'd love to access my personal data. It creates a secure, encrypted tunnel between my device and the internet, keeping my data safe no matter where I am. Plus, it's so simple to use, just one tap on any device, phone, laptop, tablet, whatever, and your privacy is completely locked down. Find out how you can get 4 months free by scanning the QR code on screen, clicking the link in the description box below, or by going to expressvpn.com/MattWalshShow. The day after this podcast aired, Pam Bondi attempted to clean up her remarks. In a post on X, here's what she wrote, quote, "Hate speech that crosses the line into threats of violence is not protected by the First Amendment. It's a crime. It is a crime. For far too long, we've watched the radical left normalize threats, calls for assassination, and cheer on political violence. That era is over. Free speech protects ideas, debate, even dissent, but it does not and will never protect violence. It is clear that this violent rhetoric is designed to silence others from voicing conservative ideals." Now, most of this post is correct. Threats are not protected under the First Amendment. Inciting violence is in calling people to commit violence against some other person is not protected by the First Amendment. And leftists are attempting to silence conservative speech using threats of violence as well as actual violence. But in her post, Bondi still uses the term hate speech as if it's a real thing. And that's completely unacceptable and frankly embarrassing. Hate speech is distinct from threats. Threats are threats. You don't need to use the word hate speech when you're talking about threats. Just say threats. Hate speech is an un-American totalitarian concept that should never be endorsed in this country, period. Now, if you're tempted to make the argument that Bondi slipped up twice, she should be given another chance, try answering this question. What has Bondi accomplished while in office? I mean, name a single achievement. Name one thing she's done, which would suggest that she's capable of dismantling Antifa and the trans industry and the LGBT terror cells that are celebrating Charlie's assassination. Just give me one example. You probably can't because everything Bondi has done has been a monumental failure. She botched the Epstein investigation, as well as we all know. She claimed the DOJ had uncovered tons of evidence in the FBI's New York field office that incriminated a lot of people, and then told us that we can't see any of it because it's too graphic. She claimed she had a client list on her desk and nothing, and then we're told that there was no list. She staged that embarrassing and incomprehensible stunt with the Epstein binders. And now in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder, she's talking about arresting people for hate speech. And by the way, not that it's the most important part of her response, but Josh Shapiro's house was not burned down because of hate speech. It was burned down because of a deranged leftist who was upset about Gaza, decided to commit an act of domestic terrorism. The burning of Josh Shapiro's mansion was yet another example of left-wing violent extremism. And here's the key point. No one on the right celebrated the attack on Josh Shapiro's residence. Not a single person. It wasn't remotely like the response to Charlie's assassination. There's just no comparison here. And while we're at it, the lunatic who killed Melissa Hortman in Minnesota was a Tim Walz appointee, a psychotic who says that Tim Walz hired him to kill her. The guy who hit Paul Pelosi with a hammer lived in a Berkeley commune with BLM signs right out front. These were not right-wing attacks either. And once again, they certainly were not celebrated by the right. But Bondi wants to both sides this whole thing, even though it's abundantly clear that political violence in this country only ever goes one way. And that's not all. When it comes to embarrassing herself, Pam Bondi has been very busy lately. In case you missed it, a couple of Office Depot employees refused to print a sign honoring Charlie Kirk for a memorial service the other day, and they said they wouldn't print the signs. The employees, who looked about as grotesque and miserable as you'd expect, claimed that the signs were propaganda. Now, Office Depot responded by firing one of the employees and clarifying that the signs were not propaganda and that they could be printed. And here's how Pam Bondi responded to that incident. Watch this.
That's horrific. It's free speech, but you shouldn't be employed anywhere if you're going to say that. And employers, you have an obligation to get rid of people. You need to look at people who are saying horrible things, and they shouldn't be working with you. Businesses cannot discriminate. If you want to go in and print posters with Charlie's pictures on them for a vigil, you have to let them do that. We can prosecute you for that. I have Harmeet Dillon right now in our civil rights unit looking at that immediately, that Office Depot had done that. We're looking at that.
Now, to be clear, the Office Depot employees who refused to print the sign for Charlie's memorial are scumbags, horrible human beings. That doesn't mean that the federal government can force Office Depot to print the signs. That's not the job of the federal government. Just like a Christian baker doesn't have to bake a bake a gay wedding cake if he doesn't want to, Office Depot doesn't have to print a sign for a Charlie Kirk memorial if they don't want to. It's possible for people to do horrible things without the federal government getting involved. And most importantly, conservatives have fought for decades, with some very significant success, to secure the right to refuse service to anyone. We have been beating this drum over and over and over again for years. This is freedom of association. It's freedom of speech. And now Bondi is attempting to unilaterally just roll back all of that after years and years of conservatives very clearly and explicitly saying that businesses have the right to refuse service. Now we have Bondi claiming that, in fact, they don't. That if you want a flyer printed, you have a right to have it printed, and the printing place has no right to not print it. That's what she's claiming, and it's total nonsense. It's just nonsense. It's also egregiously unnecessary, okay? The Office Depot issue was already handled by conservatives using our free speech. It's been handled. It's been handled exactly the way that we said these issues should be. What have we been saying for years? For years, we've been saying, well, if a business doesn't want to bake a gay cake, they shouldn't have to. And then the left says, well, what if they refuse service to you? Should they be allowed to do that? Yes, well, they should. I don't think they should, right? I wouldn't agree with it if they refuse service to me for my political views. But yeah, they should have that right. Well, would you go then complain and tell everyone? Yeah, maybe I would. I mean, then I have the right, if I get refused service, they have the right to do that. I have the right to go and tell everybody that, hey, this company over here, if you're conservative, they hate you, and so you shouldn't support them. I have the right to do that. That is totally, I'm not using force. This is not the government imposing anything. This is them with their own freedom in the free market saying they don't want to serve me, and then it's me with my free speech and my freedom of association telling, people that are on my side that, hey, they don't want you. That's how these things should be handled. And also, that was always our response when people said, oh, well, if you let them refuse service for a gay wedding, then what happens if, next thing you know, you have a restaurant that says, well, we're not going to serve black people? What has our response been to that? They say, well, should a restaurant be able to refuse service to black people? Yeah, they should. Actually, they should have that right. You should be able to refuse service to anyone. You should not be compelled by the government to provide service to anybody. It's your company. It's your business. You can do what you want. However, what have we always said? It's like, okay, well, first of all, it's not going to happen. Okay. No restaurant is going to say we're not going to serve black people. It's not just not going to actually happen. And if it did, that restaurant would be out of business in like 50 seconds. Okay. By the end of the day, they'd be out of business because many other people in the free market using their free speech would be, calling attention to that. And that company would be out of business almost immediately. That's how these things would work, which is why you don't need the government stepping in. So you have to, litigating these sorts of issues. Let every company provide service to whoever they want. And then as a society, we'll work that out. And in this case, it's exactly how it went. The company fired the employee. They pledged to print the flyers. The issue was solved. It's over. It's done. We were able to, as conservatives, stick to our freedom of association principles while also getting accountability for the vile person who refused to print the flyers. We won. And now Pam Bondi wants to swoop in after the fact and sabotage everything. And worst of all, she's doing it in the name of Charlie Kirk. Charlie was one of the main proponents of freedom of association and freedom of speech in the country. Charlie abhorred the idea of hate speech laws. Now, there have been far too many people in the past week speaking for Charlie, saying what he would or would not want. But in this case, I can say with absolute certainty that Charlie would not want hate speech laws to be created and enforced in his name. He understood the idea that speech isn't illegal just because it's viewed as hateful, whatever that means. But our Attorney General, the one person who should understand this concept better than anybody, is as clueless as she's ever been. She stands in the way of our very urgent mission, which is to dismantle left-wing terror cells, left-wing NGOs that threaten our fundamental right to freedom of speech. We need an Attorney General who's up to this enormous, gargantuan task which is before us. A serious person who can tackle the challenge with decisiveness and clarity. Pam Bondi is not that person. And that's why Trump has to cut her loose. It's also why she is today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.